Prime Minister Narendra Modi is off to visit the war-torn country of Ukraine. It's a historic visit in a number of ways. Modi is the first Prime Minister to visit Ukraine in decades. He's also going just as the Russia-Ukraine war continues to rage on. But his visit to Ukraine has also become controversial. Many argue that Modi's decision to go to Ukraine is motivated only by pressure from Western countries, and his decision to go could be a sign of weakness in India's foreign policy. They warn that Prime Minister Modi's visit to Ukraine is a mistake. On this episode of Threadbare, we ask that simple question: is Modi making the wrong call by going to Ukraine? So let's lay out some of the background for you. On July 8 this year, Prime Minister Narendra Modi visited Russia for a bilateral summit with President Vladimir Putin. Now, on the face of it, this wasn't such a big deal. After all, Russia is one of India's most important geopolitical partners, and high-level meetings aren't exactly new between the two countries. But the visit quickly turned controversial. First, even as Modi was doing his traditional hug diplomacy with Putin, the all-important NATO summit was taking place in Washington. And of course, NATO's number one priority right now is defeating Russia on the battlefield in Ukraine. The NATO military alliance also includes some of India's most important new partners: America, Britain, France, Germany, and other major Western powers. For many of these Indian partners, the timing of Modi's visit wasn't the best. For example, even as NATO was meeting to discuss how to break Russia's military, one of its closest partners, India, was hobnobbing with President Vladimir Putin. Now, this was a bad look for Modi. But it was made even worse by the fact that Russia launched a military strike on a children's hospital in Ukraine on the very day of the Putin-Modi summit. At least 31 people died in that attack. And afterwards, President Zelensky of Ukraine directly attacked Modi for meeting with Putin even as Russia wages a war against his country. Given that Zelensky enjoys celebrity status across the Western world, it only added to the perception that Modi's Russia's visit was a PR disaster. America, in particular, expressed its disappointment with Modi's decision to engage Russia when he did.
Mr. Chairman, I could not agree with you more about our disappointment about the symbolism and the timing of Prime Minister Modi's trip to Moscow. We are having those tough conversations with our Indian friends.
Soon after Modi's return, a fresh announcement was made. Prime Minister Narendra Modi would travel to Ukraine. To many observers, this announcement came off as rushed and desperate. India, they argued, was trying too obviously to make the West happy after Modi's visit to Russia. And they believe that this is a mistake. Now, there's a few key reasons why. First, it comes across as weak. India has always had a non-aligned policy, which means that India engages with countries on the basis of its interest. So India can essentially have a good relationship with America and the West on one hand, as well as Russia and China on the other. Now, Modi's visit to Russia was in line with that policy. Now, this policy is not always easy, and it does leave countries annoyed with India at times. But Modi's visit to Russia was in line with that established Indian policy. Despite Russia's war in Ukraine, India has continued to purchase defense equipment and oil from Moscow, and it's also refused to cut high-level strategic ties. While Modi's latest visit to Russia did happen at the same time as the NATO summit in Washington, the Prime Minister's schedule is decided months in advance and can't be changed easily. Also, the fact that Modi's visit coincided with the attack on the children's hospital in Ukraine was simply a coincidence. So it's silly to blame Modi for something that wasn't in his control, and to then base India's foreign policy on the basis of that. So with all of this, Modi's critics argue that his hastily announced visit to Ukraine is effectively a weak apology to Western countries who are annoyed with India's policy. And India has nothing to apologize for, they say, since it's just pursuing its national interest by meeting with the Russian president. Second, they also argue that there are no benefits to India from Modi visiting Ukraine. The two countries don't do very much together when it comes to bilateral trade, technology, or even political cooperation. Since Ukraine has just launched an offensive inside Russia, there is little chance that the Russia-Ukraine war will end soon. So Modi can't even make strong progress in mediating an end to the conflict. Also, Russia is not going to be happy about India visiting Ukraine so soon after Modi's summit with Putin. Modi's critics argue that if he really wanted to see Zelensky, he could have met him on the sidelines of the UN General Assembly meet in New York in September. After all, the two men have already met on the sidelines of the G7 summit in July. So with all of this, is Modi's Ukraine visit a mistake? And are his critics right? Actually, it's probably a good idea for Modi to go to Kyiv. That's because the Ukraine war has been a constant irritant in India's relationship with its Western partners. While many of these countries are publicly accepting of India's position on the war, they are privately annoyed by India's refusal to condemn Russia's invasion. It has also led to persistent questions about how aligned India and the West really are on key strategic concerns. But a successful Modi visit to Ukraine can have changed the global narrative. Modi has already attracted significant attention in the West when he went to Russia and condoled the death of Ukrainian children in the war. His famous comment, "This is not an era of war," also attracted a great deal of global attention. If Modi can go to Ukraine and show empathy and understanding with Ukraine's struggle, it could help dampen a lot of the criticism that India has faced in the Western world. Rather than pretending Ukraine isn't an issue between India and its Western partners, a statesman-like visit by Prime Minister Narendra Modi can deal with the problem head-on.
Actually be very well received to see that sign of show of support for Zelensky, at least in terms of the relationship, to invest in that relationship. And I think that this will be received extremely well in Washington, and likely will help allay some of the concerns that were raised last month during the visit to Moscow, again, that coincided with the NATO summit.
Also, you can argue that Modi's Ukraine visit is really a sign of strength rather than weakness.
I don't think actually it's a sign of weakness at all. In fact, it's the opposite. It's a sign of strength. It's a sign saying, look, we aren't caving to Western demands or American demands at the UN about the Ukrainian invasion or what that means for the Russian-Indian relationship, but it means that we're really kind of defining on our own terms and on Indian terms what this looks like.
India's foreign policy has always stressed balance and engaging with all parties to a conflict. Having visited Russia, it's only right that Modi should also visit Ukraine, regardless of how Moscow feels about it. Just to give you another example, despite India's arguably closer relationship with Israel, Modi made sure to visit both Palestine and Israel when he went to the region in 2018. And also, while it's true that Russia and Ukraine aren't ready for peace talks right now, they're likely to be in the future. And that is an opportunity for India.
There's lots of examples where India has served a key brokerage function within the global system on economic relations, on political relations, that I think will continue to be very important in the future on Ukraine as a specific crisis, but then in general in future conflicts and in future crises. And I think this is a really good moment for Modi to go and make a strong statement in Poland and on Ukraine, especially following on from the visit, which everyone kind of acknowledges was not the most optically best moment, coinciding with the NATO summit in Washington.
Further, any Modi visit to Ukraine is also going to involve a lot of private messaging to Russia to ensure that India's relationship with Moscow will not take a hit. To sum up, Modi's visit to Ukraine is not without risk. India has had a difficult relationship with Kyiv since the Ukraine war began, and it's possible that Moscow will feel annoyed by Modi's visit. It's also possible that some countries could interpret Modi's visit as a sign of weakness and as a belated apology to Western countries. But there are also considerable benefits, from having a genuinely balanced policy on Ukraine to having the chance to finally ease tension with Western powers on the Ukraine war. Modi's visit to Ukraine is risky, but it's a risk worth taking. Thank you so much for watching Threadbare with me, Shashank Matu. You can catch us once every week on India Today Global.